Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Druid's Rune. This is episode 6, and in this episode we are going to focus upon the Druid virtue of Foresight. In our virtue section, we will discuss what Foresight is, how it is gathered, and how it can be used effectively. In our Podly Blessing section, Wise Thrice will share a pair of charms he uses for his own attempts at being foresightful. In the ritual section, we will cover some basics on how shamans, witches, druids, and prophets attempt to see the future, and it isn't as magical as you might think. Finally, we don't have a crafting section on this podcast, as Wise Thrice is still laboring the last thing he informed you about, his Druid's Rune Oracle project, which is making some slow progress, but is making progress. But first, our Druid's Rune Errata section. Some people asked me about my comments on pathworking in the last episode. Specifically, they asked what I meant when I said I was weird, and that when I pathwork I get messages for other people. As this ties into some of the subject of foresight, I thought it'd be good to address it here. Pathworking in the Hermetic tradition is a series of exercises that bears some resemblance to guided meditation. However, in pathworking, the seeker is moving their consciousness through the levels of the spiritual world as represented on the Etayim, the Tree of Life. The spheres of the tree have specific functions and a spiritual landscape that remains fairly consistent among the seekers. While pathworking, it is possible for the seekers to share the same meditative space, but the guardians and figures encountered give to each individual seeker individual information pertaining to them. Personally, I believe that is because the pathworking exercise is more psychological as a phenomenon than it is spiritual as a phenomenon, although it does move in both these planes of our experience. So when I come out of a pathworking exercise and the guardians impart information to me that is meant for someone else, that is a bit outside of the norm. My shamanic friends say that my experience is much more akin to the shamanic trance journey. These journeys, in my opinion, in these exercises, it is my opinion that there is more of a spiritual component to the phenomenon than a psychological component to it. They are also unpredictable, shamanic trance journeys that is, and much harder to integrate into waking consciousness in my opinion. Trance journeying is often done for the benefit of others than the shaman. Emotional healing messages or soul energy retrieval is often the goal of these experiences. Whereas a pathworking exercise is formalized, most journeys are very free-form. I hope that clears up what I meant. I did not mean to sound like I was claiming some higher acumen in spirit travel than other mages. I merely meant that I find my personal experience with this magical art outside the normative experience of others. In short, it's weird. Now, on to the podcast proper. We will begin with the Druid Virtues section. Foresight. Foresight is the ability to see the most likely results of a given action or belief. All human beings have foresight, but in those of us who develop quick or mastery of it, a magical reputation can develop. Foresight is often misconstrued as divination, or as a prophecy from God. Those events do indeed express the idea of foresight to its nth degree. But a good line from a good movie expresses the concept of foresight even better. In this movie, Excalibur, Merlin asks Morgana if she has the sight. We have earlier seen Merlin predict Guinevere and Lancelot's affair to Arthur, so the movie has already established that Merlin knows what he's talking about. Morgana turns to look off camera, and she says she sees a shining castle upon a hill. Merlin clucks his tongue at her and says she will have to do better than that, for the plan is well known. This scene shows that foresight is partially intuition, partially knowledge, partially psychological development, and mostly made of logical deductions. Foresight has allowed humanity to become the dominant life form on this planet. The ability to understand what the likely outcomes of our actions are going to be is perhaps even more important to our species' survival than our tool using and language ability. Foresight allows us to plan ahead, whereas other animals have to rely upon instincts. It should be no surprise to us, then, that someone with well-developed foresight can be considered to be in touch with the gods. Have you ever played chess? It is another good analogy for the skill of foresight. In chess, both the players can see all the pieces of the game. There are no hidden units or random chance at work. There is only the ability to foresee the actions of your opponent to the moves that you will make. Adequate chess players are said to be able to see 3 moves ahead into the game. Good players can be said to see somewhere between 5 and 7 moves ahead, and world-class players can often read 10 or more moves ahead into the game. The information at work is more than just the limits of the pieces and the maximum number of variances of movements allowed. There is also the ability to judge your opponent's likely actions based off what you know of their personality and past behavior. This analogy is very appropriate for us druids. We are in a world that works by certain material laws. It has limited resources and is filled with other players that are each seeking to maximize their personal power. If we can understand how our actions will affect the world, we can maximize our own impact and help mitigate the harmful impact of others. This means that foresight goes hand in hand with a truthful understanding of how things actually work. Without factual past knowledge, we cannot make successful predictions. For Druids, this principle means that we tend to be very practical, down-to-earth kinds of people that won't believe in something until we have proven it to ourselves. Now I realize that may sound strange, since Druids also tend to believe in fairies, magic, and enchantment. But make a claim to a Druid, and their first words are likely to be, "Can you cite me your sources so I can research it myself?" Foresight's grounding may be in knowledge, but some of its ability comes from the perception and intuitive insight. Being able to read the situation one is in, or that is likely to develop, gives an edge to making the proper choices. For instance, foresight in the business world predicts needs and trends. In the political world, it anticipates the reactions to legislation. In the social world, it prevents us from making mistakes that can anger many of our friends. But how can we develop it? Foresight can definitely be aided by adding to one's knowledge base, but mostly it can only be germinated from experience. As we gain experience of the world and of others, we not only have more facts, but we have more validly proven percentages about how an action is likely to occur. We can also more easily identify with the exceptions or unexpected breakthroughs and understandings that might occur because we can more easily recognize the secondary traits of a person or situation. For instance, when picking a winning prize fighter, scouts consider not only the in-ring performance, but how dedicated and determined the fighters train. Past experience has taught them what character traits a winning fighter has. Often these traits are not seen in the ring itself, but outside of it. Thus they may favor a fighter who at first seems small or doesn't have good reach, but if he shows he has heart or superior movement, he will still more likely to win than any of the bruisers. Foresight can also be said to be the child of logical deduction. Without the ability to understand how one thing leads to another, we cannot make an accurate prediction. For an example of this, let us briefly look at mathematics. If I teach a student to memorize multiplication tables, they will know a fact. They may know that 9 times 9 equals 81. But unless I spend the time to teach them the process of why multiplication works, they will not understand why 9 times 9 equals 81, and will be unable to predict any other sum I may ask of them. Also, without an understanding of the principles of logic, they would not be able to reverse the multiplication process without also being demonstratively taught division. If I were to say teach someone how multiplication works, but did not teach them division, then later I ask them to discover how many times 81 can be broken down into groups of 9, they might start marking on paper little groups of 9 and then tell me the result, but they still wouldn't really understand division. But if I were to phrase this question to them in a different way, the process of how to divide a number, and that division is the reverse process of multiplication, will occur to the students who are reasoning and not just memorizing things by rote. For an example of foresight, I'm going to recount an event from my own life. Forgive me if you've heard this before. It was the last time Israel had invaded Lebanon. The Islamic militant group Hezbollah was firing rockets into Israel, and the Lebanese government was pretty much powerless to stop it. The Israelis had decided that since the Lebanese government was powerless to stop it, they would have to do something about it themselves. And they decided the only way to do that was to destroy Hezbollah's bases wherever they could find them, understanding that it would mean not only the loss of civilian lives and of Israeli soldiers, but black marks on their public reputation. Nobody likes the person who starts a war, even if it's necessary. My friends and I were sitting outside the safety of a pub here in the States, and one of them, who was brand new to the travesty that is Middle Eastern politics, asked me what was likely to happen. He was honestly convinced he was looking at World War III. He was a very, not quite evangelical Christian, but he was a very alarmist person at the time. I responded, "This is normal. You're looking at 3 to 5 weeks of fighting. Israel will eventually leave the country. Hezbollah will be quiet for about 3 months or so, and a whole lot of people will have died that didn't need to because people felt like rattling sabers. Just wasn't enough." If memory serves, I was wrong by only 1 week. The conflict lasted 6 weeks. But sadly, everything else I said came true. My pessimistic opinion is based on my knowledge of what is likely to transpire in this theater of the world because of how the people in power choose to make decisions and why. When we next convened at the pub, the same friend asked me if the leaders of the countries and organizations involved would do anything to prevent another outbreak of violence. And my answer was, of course not. No matter what reasonable solution is advanced in the region, to adopt it makes you look weak. And since bullets have started flying in this region, nobody wants to look weak. Nobody wants to reason. They want to win. And sadly, I've been proven right about that one as well. Foresight is difficult for many people to master because of the cultural and psychological barriers that we are taught as we are grown, that we should not trust ourselves or our feelings. We should instead trust what authorities tell us about the world and what is best for us. As a result, too many children say farewell to their imaginal friends far too soon. Too many teenagers become obsessed with fitting into a mold rather than making their own, and too many adults refuse to believe they have any power that the world can change for the better. With your forbearance, I'm going to cite another example from my life. Recently I remarked that I had lost the career I'd been gathering over the past 7 years. I was employed by a small business, and things did not end well. As I read my journals, I realized that I had the foresight to see what was going on and when it was going to happen. I have even predicted a date of the likely breaking event, and I was only off by 3 months. But as I read my journals, it occurs to me that why I stayed in such a horrible situation for so long. I did not wish to believe that my intuition was right about the character of my employer. Who was I to doubt the intentions of someone I had known for years? The answer is that I was exactly the person who should be calling to task someone I had known for years. That I doubted my intuition and foresight is what kept me in such a terrible position for so long. The fear of going against authority, of our social indoctrination, is what keeps most of us from being able to see with the sight. Think about all the fairy tales you've heard. Whenever a hero needs to have his future foretold, or prophecy is laid upon them, where do they go find the wise man or the wise woman? What part of the woods does the good fairy live in? On the fringe, away from society's constant pressure to conform to a belief system that teaches us we cannot trust ourselves. Amongst the natural surroundings of the real world, rather than the created world of culture, is where you find the wise. And I don't have this written in my notes, but I guess what I'm encouraging you to do is, if you really feel confused about something, take some time off. If you find you cannot see a solution, I advise you to spend some time away from the environment that created it. It doesn't have to be long. An hour of honest quietude can work wonders. In extreme cases, a camping trip, or even some long-term trip like hiking the Appalachian Trail or going on a pilgrimage may be called for. Podly blessings. There are a pair of blessings I use for foresight. Now, I wrote these when I was really, really young in my magical career. So the poetry, I apologize for it. As I look back at them now, I'm like, wow, it's a little teenager-ish. But it still works, and I have faith in it because I've used it. So here we go. In my own practice, I find that foresight will largely come to you unbidden. But I've had success at placing myself in the mental state where it is more likely to occur on its own. The ritual is relatively simple. First, take 3 deep breaths and calm yourself. Then place your hands into a mudra that you feel matches the situation you're trying to foresee the outcome for. Mudras are hand seals that are normally associated with yoga or some esoteric martial arts. But if you're not familiar with those disciplines, don't worry. For this practice, I actually use elemental mudras that I devised on my own. Finally, I recite this blessing to place myself in the proper receptive mindset. Powers, let me see, let me see. Holy ones, let me see, let me see. Spirits, let me see, let me see. Ancestors, let me see, let me see. Let me see the path best for others and for me. This is the quick version of my ritual. The long form involves intricately drawn circles, chanting in foreign languages, tables of art, and candles with dribbly bits. That last part was a Discworld reference. As you can tell, you don't have to have much to actually be foresightful. You just have to quiet down and start listening. This ritual may take a short amount of time or a lengthy one to produce results, but when you are satisfied that you have your results, I strongly suggest you record them in your journal for later review. One of the best things that will build your confidence as a mage is looking at your notes and seeing where you were right. You may also feel the need to invoke a power, a spirit, a totem, ancestor, or holy one you specifically feel can aid you. An example from my own recent workings are the images of Lulam Fada, while I desperately try to find which skill of mine will produce the most income. I often also recite a blessing with Breege when I compose my Druid's Rune episodes, and it goes something like this. Breege, please repeat to me not only my words, but how they sound to ears that are not mine, how they fall, how they rhyme, what meanings others may hear, aid me in being clear. I probably at some point need to do a episode on poetry. I'll probably do it as a ramble. I'm trying to keep the official Druid's Runes on a set kind of format that I saw when I first made them. when I first came up with the idea in my head about having each Rune episode match one of the 33 virtues that I see. Okay, exercises. Exercises for foresight. This can be kind of fun. First, you need a mall, or any place public, but a mall is ideal. Second, you need coffee or a drink of some kind. Then you just sit down in the food court and you watch. Pick a patron at random, anyone will do, and start trying to predict what it is they will order when they go to the food court. With a little practice, you can get extremely good at this. Without turning this into a stalking thing, you can also predict into which shop they will venture, or what they will buy. This may seem like it doesn't have anything to do with foresight, but if you stop and think about it, it has a whole lot to do with foresight. You have someone you have not met before, and based off your intuitive understanding of them, you're trying to make a prediction. That helps build our intuition. Another example of this exercise is to take a news story, any news story, and predict what kind of follow-up stories that story will generate. I'm not saying what the ethical or moral implications of the story are, but how the story will be reported and how follow-up stories will be reported. You also want to try to go for how frequent the story will be reported. A good example is recently in the state of Florida, there was a politician that had gotten into some competitive statements with his opponent. And when I saw it, I felt I could predict what the likely outcome of the next news coverage of this candidate for the next 2 weeks would be. I was pretty much right. It actually went farther than I thought it would, but it was there. And again, being vague, but you get the gist of the idea. And the news story can be anything. It doesn't have to be politics. It can be a human interest story. But you're looking for a story that has follow-up, so you can exercise the part of our foresight that deals with understanding others. The next exercise, and this is the quote-unquote magical one, requires the use of a deck of playing cards. Now, every time I've demonstrated this to one of my pagany witchy friends, they have been amazed at how simple it is and how fast it produces results. So I highly recommend this exercise. I give it to you freely. Take the cards, shuffle them. Once they are shuffled, you're going to try to predict which of the following 4 categories you're about to pull off the top of the deck. A black number card, a red number card, a black face card, or a red face card. For each card you predict correctly, place them in a pile face up on your left. For each card you predict partially correct, such as a red number card when you called for a black number card, or a red face card when you called for a red number card, place these cards in a pile in the middle. For each card you have completely wrong, place them in a pile to your right. Each correct card is worth 2 points. Each partially correct card is worth 1 point. By dividing your score by 104, you can arrive at a percentage of correct foresight. This exercise works because it partially taps into our ability to predict, our intuition, and our knowledge of what cards are left in the deck based on what we've seen happen. It has been my experience that on any day when I'm above 60% accuracy, my foresight should be listened to carefully, and on days of 80% or higher, I give it great credence. Ritual section. An ancient form of foresight is that of dream interpretation or dream seeking. We have sources that tell us that the classical Druids used a technique they called the bull's sleep to accomplish this. In a nutshell, the Druid would attend a feast of a chieftain that wanted the dream. He would eat and drink with the celebrants from the meat of a bull. This bull's skin would then be laid on the floor like a blanket. The Druid would then recline upon it, and when he awoke, he would have a message or a dream for the chieftain. The sources do not specifically say this, but it is logical to conclude that also some type of ethnogenic or perhaps a good deal of intoxicant was used prior to this sleep. This process sounds very similar to how many modern shamans and indigenous shamans go on a trance journey. So I know what you're thinking. How do I perform a bull's sleep? Well, first you need about 100 Neo-Celtic Druids to show up at the same place at the same time. And if you achieve that major miracle, seriously though, you're going to be alone, and you know it. Here's what I do. Many years ago, one of my Cherokee friends gave me a blanket that they had woven for me. They had chanted prayers into the blanket while it was being woven. The prayers were that I might dream well and sleep deeply. Perhaps what I experienced was just a case of Dumbo's magic feather, but it worked. In less than a month, I was sleeping soundly, and the nightmares that I had had terrorizing me had gone away. Old dreams that I had first dreamed when I was a teenager came back to me. I took the blanket with me everywhere I moved for almost 20 years, before I lost it in a household accident. And that's infuriating. When you lose a good tool like that, it's... Urgh. Whenever I slept with that blanket, my having a dream was never in doubt. This is the first hurdle, to believe that you will dream and remember it. Find some place you will only try to dream the bull asleep in, and never sleep there for any other reason. Or if you have a portable dream blanket, like I did, use it whenever you want to make the attempt at bull sleep. Second, our technology now has many devices that can play a binaural current. Find a binaural track that is relaxing for you, and prep it for the dream. I stand by the line of products available via HoloSync, and I also recommend the HoloSync program based off my personal success with it. Binaural currents are sounds that appear to help generate a more relaxed state and can aid us in meditation. Get a good pair of headphones and prep your track. Third, this point will be a little controversial. I do not normally condone the use of ethnogenics in ritual, not because I have any moral compunctions against it, but because in most places in the states and first world nations they are illegal to possess and use. That being said, we all know of the kinds of dreams that people report after they've had a few alcoholic beverages. Using some chemical to award us a higher amount of foresight seems it is possible and within the realm of practice. I don't know if this will work for you, and I don't advise this lightly. But currently there are tablets of melatonin available over the counter in most pharmacies. Both my wife and I are very sensitive to melatonin, and have had vivid dreams the nights we've had to use it in aiding us sleep. As with anything you're going to put into your body, be careful and watch your reactions, and if you have a negative experience, don't do it again. Fourth, once you have all this prepared, recline and drift off, whispering to yourself that you want to remember your dreams. If there is a particular thing you are looking into, mention it. If you find a particular power or holy one is helpful, mention them. When you awake, voice record or write down all that you can remember of the experience. Fifth, it is very easy to dismiss that what you see is just a dream. And dreaming's surreal quality can mean that a literal interpretation of the dream is often not valid. But if you approach what you have seen with the question, what am I trying to tell myself? You will have a large amount of success. You must trust yourself. Had I done so recently in the situation I was in, it would not currently be as bad off as I am. And believe me, I kick myself a lot when I read my entries and I can clearly see how right I was in what I was warning myself against, but I refuse to believe I was right. Other things you might wish to consider. There are several quality books on lucid dreaming on the market at this particular moment. You might consider getting them and going through one of the lucid dreaming courses. That is all I have right now for this Druid Runes episode. This one is actually pretty short, all things considered. It looks like we're coming in at just under 30 minutes. Normally my episodes have been an hour. Hopefully it wasn't just me rushing it. I'm not sure what I have next on my schedule for the next Druid Runes episode. I'm probably going to post a ramble up after this, dealing with some other things that I thought. Typically the organization of the podcasts, or vidcasts, or whatever you want to call them, is going to be that the Druid's Rune episodes specifically relate around the Druid virtues, and then everything is piled off of there. Druid rambles are topics that just occurred to me at the time that I thought needed to be talked about. The Druid's Rune legends are specific stories that either I was told, I tell, or I have read and feel need to be retold a certain way. For instance, many of the myths that we have inherited have a lot of Christian filters on them, and as a result there is a lot of misunderstanding and attributed actions that probably weren't so to characters in those myths. And I'm going to probably be adding a new, there's the Drop playlist, which is specifically about the Drop project, the Druid's Rune Oracular project. And the last playlist I'm thinking of adding is one I call Elements of Practice. This is the one that's a little tricky, because when you are spread out all over the United States and the material you're using for liturgy is copyrighted, and the material you're using for ritual is copyrighted and you didn't write it, it can be kind of tricky to talk about it or record it and put it up without infringing on the original author's rights to make money off of their work. And so I'm not quite sure how Elements of Practice is going to work, because a good chunk of what I do is not really mine. a good chunk of what I do, I would say probably about 2/3 of it, is stuff I was either taught by a mentor, was taught from a book by the mentor, or was taught from the book myself, self-training. And I'm really hesitant to cross that line because I feel that published authors deserve the benefit of their work. And I'd be hesitant to cross that line and make it seem like I'm trying to infringe on that work. But all of us who are mages, all of us who are druids and pagans that are working the magical side of things, when we start creating, we take an idea or the way the idea is symbolized by one operator and then integrate it into our own way of doing things and then begin to meld it with other things we've learned in the past until we end up coming up with a whole working interface to the spirit world that is ours. And it's kind of hard to, at least I'm finding it more difficult, to talk about these concepts and these virtues and the way of being a druid and not go into that part of it, because as I see the holistic experience of being a druid, magic is tied into it. And that magic that's tied into it is very deeply detailed. And so when I speak, I find it wanting to come out. And it's kind of unfair to the listener who might be listening to my audio journals to say something and them not know what it is. For instance, let me go off this one. Let's say if I mention an exercise of mine called IIARR. That's the abbreviation for it. And I could talk about it generally and say that IIARR is my version of IOB. But unless you've been in hermetics for a while, you don't even know what IOB is. So it'd be much more helpful for anyone listening if I could detail those processes. But again, I run into the problem of you're dealing with someone else's copyright. So I'm not sure how I'm going to handle this one. But I definitely feel like certain elements of my practice need to be up there. Particularly my tables of correspondence that I use, because they're different than most other tables of correspondence I've seen in Hermetic work, because they're more influenced by Druidry. And Hermeticists know what I mean by table of correspondence. You may not if you're listening and you're new. Essentially, a table of correspondence is a map of the spirit world and what real-world objects mimic lessons in the spirit world. So that'll probably be called the elements of practice, and that will be quite a lot. But we're working at it. As I've said in other podcasts, I am working with limited equipment. I'm actually recording this one off my phone tablet. I had hoped to have a computer by now, but sadly, unpredictability likes to come along. And fortunately, I have a spiritual mentor right now that is keeping me sane while all this unpredictability is going on, because when I was first struck by this, I felt like a substance you can't see on YouTube. And it didn't go well for several weeks until I finally calmed down enough to go, okay, I'm in it. What do I do about it? So that's where we are. It is Druid's Rune number 6, the virtue of Foresight. And hopefully I will learn to listen to mine better. And I hope that what I have given you will help you listen to yours. Until I see you next time, this is Wise Thrice wishing you health, wealth, and peace, and live the heroic life.